The government has an important but constrained role to play in our society, the role of commerce, the role of nonprofits and charities.
I'm Daniel Green. We're back at Antigua Forum 2019. This is the 8th Antigua Forum. Can you give us a definition, just in your mind? What is social change and how does one start?
So I generally think of this as social change as having two different tracks. So the first is what most policy think tanks are more comfortable with. It's the short-term social change. And that's advancing ideas that have been worked out in the academic literature or in public intellectual debates into the policy stream. So it's the kind of things we're thinking about in terms of shifting the Overton window, building coalitions, that kind of thing. And really challenging are some of our very basic notions about what a free and fair and just and civil society is, and advancing some pretty exciting intellectual traditions in a very modern-focused sort of way about how these ideas apply to our society today and going forward.
So, talking about applying the ideas, can you give us some examples, concrete things that you've done at Mercatus Center that you think are the best example of social change? So
one thing that I'm really excited about right now is work that my colleagues are doing on state regulatory reform. So by way of background, the federal government's regulatory processes are all covered under something called the Administrative Procedures Act. And it hasn't really been changed in a very long time. And there are a lot of great ideas in the academy and in think tanks about what needs to be done to modernize America's regulatory regime. But getting anything done in Washington, especially something that kind of technical and frankly not sexy, is pretty difficult to do.
Are you more optimistic about the federal government reforming or states, or are there any specific states?
One of the things on the state level is that this has been a really bipartisan issue or a transpartisan issue. So to give you one example, in Virginia, the legislature, which is controlled by Republicans, passed a law that was signed by a Democratic governor that requires a 25% reduction in regulations affecting criminal justice and occupational licensing over a 3-year period. And immediately after this was passed and signed, the governor put out a press release talking about how important this was for the future of Virginia's economy. Well, not to be outdone, the Republican Speaker of the House of Delegates has been giving regular updates on how many regulations have been taken off the books. And this is criminal justice and this is occupational licensing. People may not agree on things when it comes to environmental protection or other areas. But let's start where there is common ground, and we see that there is a lot more room for that common ground to happen on the state level. I realize every time I work with reformers outside of the United States and Europe is how lucky we are that we're operating in the United States in a framework where there is a rule of law. There is, at a minimum, tacit commitment or verbal commitment to some classical liberal principles from both of our major parties. Now, we stray from this in execution, and in many cases, these principles are honored in the breach. But we're at least starting from a point that respects the individual, respects the rule of law, understands the government has an important but constrained role to play in our society, appreciates civil society, the role of commerce, the role of nonprofits and charities. Many other people are not operating in this kind of environment.
Is there anything that you would like to learn from other countries or specific countries you have in mind that you think that they are exemplars of social change? And what would you ask the people that were the architects of that kind of change?
So I think that there is a popular perception that a lot of the time if you're doing serious reforms, you kind of have to walk through a valley of the shadow of death to get to the other side. And I don't know if this is actually true. I know that this is not a politically sexy thing to sell. It's not a good thing to go to a politician and say, you're probably going to lose your job, but in 10 years, your city or your state or the country will thank you for it.
Right.
And one of the things that I enjoyed talking to people at Antigua Forum is a lot of the times people put out social change maps of these are the different individuals and constituencies. and talking to them, talking through who are actually in these constituencies, who are the people that actually have influence, who are the people that influence the decision makers, and really thinking about social change not just as something that happens at a macro level, but what are the actual real micro foundations of what's happening, why is it happening, and how can it happen more effectively.
How important do you think it is to measure, and what is sort of your guiding philosophy or baseline of measurement? How do you go about measuring the work you do at Mercatus?
We've become much more qualitative over the last 3 or 4 years, and that's for a couple of reasons. One, we fell into the same trap that I think every organization that doesn't have a profit and loss statement does, which is they start pulling the numbers that can be pulled out and putting them into board reports and donor reports and everything else. A couple of years ago, as we were preparing for our annual board of directors meeting, I was working with our communications director going through our communications metrics. But really, if what we're trying to do is to affect change over the medium and longer terms, we need to be looking at what are the 3 or 4 or 5 year stories of how we have tried something, iterated, learned from it, and either become successful as a result or realize that this wasn't going to work and shut down a project.
Well, thank you for your time. First of all, coming to Guatemala, coming here to Antigua Forum.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks for everything that you and everyone else did to make Antigua Forum a success.